Growing up, there was always a hierarchy in my family, and I was at the bottom of it. My older brother Daniel graduated top of his class and went to law school. My younger sister Claire got a full scholarship to study finance. And then there was me, Emma, the one who dropped out of college after 2 years because I couldn't sit in a lecture hall pretending to care about things that didn't interest me. My father had a name for me that he thought was affectionate. The way people think insults said with a smile don't count. "There's the dumb one," he'd say when I walked into a room, usually followed by a laugh that invited everyone else to laugh with him. My mother never corrected him. She just added her own version of it. "Emma's still figuring things out," she'd say to relatives, in the same tone you'd use to explain away a stain on the carpet. I spent my 20s working construction crews, then landscaping, then odd jobs that never quite added up to a career my parents could brag about. Every Thanksgiving was the same ritual. Daniel talking about his firm's newest case, Claire talking about her promotion, and then a silence when it was my turn, followed by my father's inevitable, "Well, we can't all be sharp, can we?" I laughed along. What else was I going to do? I was 28 years old and still hoping that if I just kept showing up, eventually they'd see something in me worth respecting. Then, at 28, I did something that finally broke the pattern, just not in the way I expected. I'd been saving for years, quietly, working landscaping jobs on wealthy properties outside the city, and I'd noticed something nobody else seemed to care about: a rundown 140-acre farm 2 hours north, sitting on land that backed up against a stretch of undeveloped hillside. The farmhouse was falling apart. The soil hadn't been properly worked in a decade. Nobody wanted it. It went up for auction at a price so low most people assumed something was wrong with the title. The old farmer selling it, a woman named Ruth Herring who'd worked that land for 40 years before her knees gave out, walked me around the property before the auction. Near the property line, she stopped and looked up at the ridge behind the house for a long moment. "Company came through here back in the 90s, she said. "Government survey, I think, or maybe a mining outfit. I never got the full story. They took some samples up on that hillside, said something about the ground being geologically interesting, whatever that means. Never came back. Always figured there was something up there. Nobody ever bothered to chase down." She shrugged like it was nothing, a piece of local trivia not worth much. Land's stubborn, though. Won't tell you what it's hiding unless you're patient enough to stay and ask. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was 28 and broke and staring at a farmhouse with a hole in the roof. A rumor about a survey from 30 years ago wasn't going to put food on the table. I filed it away the way you file away things that feel more like folklore than fact. And I emptied almost everything I had and bought it. When I told my family, the table went quiet in a different way than usual. Not impressed, just confused like I'd announced I was moving to the moon. "A farm?" my father said, setting down his fork. "You spent your savings on a farm? Emma, you don't know the first thing about farming. I'm going to learn." "You're going to lose everything," Claire said, not unkindly, but with the tired certainty of someone who'd already written the ending. My mother didn't say anything. She just looked at my father, and something passed between them, a decision being made without a word spoken. 2 weeks later, my father called and told me, in the same calm voice he used to order dinner, that they were done funding delusions, that if I wanted to throw my life away on a piece of dirt, I could do it without their name attached to it. He said the word disappointment so many times over that call that it stopped meaning anything. They didn't just stop helping me, they stopped calling. My mother sent one final text: "We just don't understand you anymore, Emma," and then nothing for almost 3 years. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. There were nights on that farm, alone in a farmhouse with a leaking roof, eating dinner standing up because I hadn't bought furniture yet, when I wondered if they were right about me. That kind of doubt has a way of digging in when it's been planted by the people who are supposed to believe in you the most. But I kept working. I fixed the roof myself, board by board, using videos I watched on a cracked phone screen. I learned soil composition from library books and agricultural extension offices. I planted what I thought the land wanted to grow, my first real crop. Soybeans on 40 acres I'd worked myself half to death preparing. It failed, not partially, completely. A fungal blight. I hadn't tested for wiped out almost the entire field in under 3 weeks, and I stood at the edge of it one morning, watching months of labor rot in the ground, doing the math on how much money I'd just lost and coming up with a number that made me sit down right there in the dirt. I went to the bank in town, hoping for a small operating loan to get through the next season. The loan officer, a man who clearly already knew my father's opinion of me from somewhere in town, looked over my application for less than 5 minutes. No collateral history, no farming credentials. One failed harvest already on record, he said, sliding the paperwork back across the desk. I can't in good conscience approve this. I'm sorry, ma'am. Maybe consider something more stable. I walked out of that bank with less hope than I'd walked in with, which I hadn't thought was possible. Then, 7 months in, a storm came through that the local news hadn't even bothered forecasting as serious until it was. It tore the roof I'd rebuilt clean off one corner of the farmhouse, flattened half my new planting, and killed 2 of the 3 goats I'd bought to help clear brush. I stood in the wreckage the next morning with rain still dripping through the ceiling onto the kitchen floor, and I did the math on my bank account. I had $1,100 left, no loan, no crop, and a roof I couldn't afford to fix twice. I remember sitting on the porch steps that night, the ones that still had storm debris scattered across them, and calling my mother's number just to hear a familiar voice. I hung up before it rang. I already knew what she'd say, and I couldn't survive hearing "we told you so" on top of everything else that week. I didn't quit. I don't fully know why. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the fact that quitting meant walking back into my father's kitchen and confirming out loud everything he'd already decided about me. I sold the surviving goat, patched the roof myself with salvaged lumber, and replanted smaller, smarter, closer to what the soil actually wanted instead of what I'd assumed would sell. It took the better part of a year before the farm stopped bleeding money and started, slowly, to hold its own. What I didn't fully understand at first was what I'd actually bought. Old Ruth's story about a survey crew from 30 years back turned out to be more than folklore. That hillside behind the farm wasn't just scenery. It sat over a mineral deposit that a geological survey team, out doing unrelated work for the county, stumbled onto almost 2 years after I moved in, picking up, almost by accident, exactly where that decades-old report had left off. They knocked on my door asking permission to take soil samples. I said yes, mostly out of curiosity, and a little bit because I remember Ruth looking up at that ridge and telling me the land was stubborn about what it hid. What came back changed everything. The land held a substantial deposit of rare earth minerals, the kind used in batteries, electronics, defense technology, the kind mining companies spend years searching for and rarely find already, sitting on private land with clean title and no complicated ownership disputes. Within months, I had geologists, lawyers, and mining executives driving 2 hours up a dirt road to sit in my kitchen and make offers, each one higher than the last. I hired my own lawyers before I said yes to anything. I wasn't the same naive young woman who'd once believed her father's opinion of her was the only one that mattered. I'd learned patience on that farm, the kind that comes from watching something grow slowly and refusing to rush it. 11 months later, I signed the final agreement. $39 million, structured across the mineral rights and a long-term land lease that let me keep the farmhouse and the original acreage I'd fallen in love with. I didn't call my family. I didn't need to. Word travels fast in small towns, and faster still when local news picks up a story about a young woman who struck it rich on land everyone had written off. My father found out from a coworker who'd seen the article. He called that same night. I let it go to voicemail. "Emma, it's Dad. Listen, I saw the news. That's incredible, sweetheart. We should talk. I think we've all had some time to think about things." His voice had a warmth in it I hadn't heard directed at me since childhood, back before I was old enough to be measured against my siblings and found lacking. My mother texted the next morning, "We're so proud of you. We always knew you had it in you." I read that message standing in the same kitchen where mining executives had once sat across from me trying to talk me down on price. We always knew. 3 years of silence. One voicemail I never returned. A mother who hadn't called on my birthday for 3 years straight. All erased by a number in a newspaper. I thought about all of it. Every Thanksgiving joke, every "we can't all be sharp," every night I ate standing up because I couldn't afford a table. Every doubt they'd planted that I'd had to dig out of myself alone, with no one's help but my own 2 hands and a stubbornness I didn't know I had until I needed it. I didn't call back. I didn't respond to the text. A month later, my father tried again, showing up in person this time, driving 2 hours up the same dirt road the geologists once had, standing at the door of the farmhouse. I'd rebuilt board by board while he was busy calling me a delusion. I met him on the porch instead of inviting him in. "Emma," he said, and I could hear him working to find the right tone, the one that would land. "I know things were said. I know we weren't there for you the way we should have been. But we're family. That still means something." "It meant something to me for 28 years, I said. "You're the ones who decided it stopped mattering the day I didn't need your permission to try something. That's not fair. You disowned me over a farm, Dad, not over drugs, not over anything I did to hurt anyone, because I tried to build something on my own, and it scared you that I might not need you to feel good about myself." I kept my voice even. I'd practiced this moment more times than I wanted to admit, lying awake in that farmhouse, never once imagining I'd actually get to say it out loud. "You didn't come back because you missed me. You came back because I stopped being the dumb one and started being useful to talk about at dinner parties." He didn't have an answer for that. I think on some level, he knew I was right. And there's nothing quite as silencing as being told the truth by someone you spent years underestimating. He was quiet for a long moment, looking past me at the farmhouse, the fields, the ridge on the horizon that had turned out to hold more than either of us ever imagined. When he spoke again, his voice had lost the practiced warmth from the voicemail. It sounded for the first time in my life, unrehearsed. "I made the biggest mistake of my life underestimating you," he said quietly. "I don't know how to fix that. I don't know if it can be fixed." I let the silence sit there for a moment before I answered. Because I needed him to feel the weight of it the way I'd felt the weight of every dinner table joke for 28 years. "I didn't need your apology, Dad," I said finally. "I needed your belief. And you only found it after the number got big enough to impress you." "I'm not interested in being a return on investment," I told him. "I spent my whole life being the disappointment you compared to Daniel and Claire. I'm not going to spend the rest of it being the success story you take credit for." I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I just told him plainly that he could go home and that I hoped whatever made him feel better about himself, he'd find it somewhere that wasn't my porch. He left. My mother tried calling a few more times over the following months. I answered once, told her calmly and without anger that I needed more time than a headline could buy back, and that if they were serious about repairing anything, it would take years of actions, not a single visit dressed up as reconciliation. She cried. I let her. I didn't apologize for needing space I'd more than earned. That was 8 months ago. We talk occasionally now, carefully, slowly, the way you rebuild something that was broken on purpose. My father hasn't called me the dumb one since. I don't know if that's growth or just good manners now that I could buy and sell the family business twice over. Some days, I don't care which one it is. Daniel called about a month after my father's visit. He didn't lead with congratulations. He led with an apology I hadn't expected. "I spent years letting Dad's version of you be the only version I bothered to know," he said. "I was so busy being the good son that I never once asked if you were okay. I'm sorry, Emma. That's on me." Not just him, it wasn't a perfect apology, but it was an honest one, and coming from Daniel, who'd never once in his life admitted he was wrong about anything, it meant more than he probably realized. Claire visited the farm in person, something none of them had done in the 3 years I'd owned it. She stood in the kitchen, the one with the real table now, and looked around for a long time before she said anything. "I told you that you'd lose everything," she said. "I said it like I knew something you didn't. I didn't know anything. I was just repeating what Dad always said because it was easier than actually looking at you and forming my own opinion." She shook her head. "I'm sorry I never once asked what you actually wanted out of your life. I just assumed it had to look like mine to count. I didn't need either apology to feel whole. I'd already built that on my own, board by board, storm by storm, in a farmhouse they'd never once thought to visit while I was rebuilding it. But I let them say it anyway, because some words matter even when you no longer need them to survive. What I know is this: the farm is still mine. The house has real furniture now, and a table where I actually sit down to eat. I hired 2 of the original ranch hands from the property back on full salary, kept 40 acres in active cultivation because I genuinely love growing things, and put the rest of the money somewhere my father will never get to advise me on. He spent 28 years telling me I wasn't smart enough to be taken seriously, It turned out I just needed a hillside nobody believed in, a storm that nearly broke me, a bank that said no, and enough silence from the people who doubted me to finally hear my own judgment clearly. For the first time in my life, they called me the dumb one for 28 years. It took a fungal blight, a flooded kitchen, 2 dead goats, and a $39 million mineral deposit for them to finally ask me a single question about who I actually was, and by then, I'd already learned I never needed them to ask it at all.